My full name is George Arthur William Hutton, and I'm known in lacrosse as William Bill Hutton. March 26, 1942. Born in Collingwood, Ontario. Interesting story is I came home from work one day and there was a flyer in the door. My son was 5 years old, and it was recruiting people to come out and play lacrosse. And I said, well, that's a good Canadian game. And now, understand, my father wouldn't let me play lacrosse. I lived in Long Branch. He wouldn't let me play lacrosse. He said it was too rough a sport. But when my son was 5 years old, I said, well, I'll put him in it. So I took him to the arena, and they had the kids all out on the floor, and I'm sitting up in the stands. And I was approached by an individual, and he said, would you mind helping out with the team? And I said, oh yeah, I would go to every practice anyway, so sure, I don't mind helping out. Well, I went to the teams were formed, and I went to my first practice with the team, and I says, well, where's the coach? Oh, we don't have a coach, so you're gonna have to coach too. So I was coach and manager, okay? And I says, well, that's great. I said, do we have a rule book? Oh, we can get you one of those. And I said, well, what about, is there instructions or anything like to guide me? No, we don't have anything like that. And I said, oh, okay. So I ended up watching other coaches, how they were doing it, and that's how I started. And we didn't have anybody to play with, so I approached Whitby, Gerard Road, and Oshawa, and we formed what they call the Durham League, which really was house league, but the four communities got together. Now, that was working together to provide an environment of play, and that was a good thing. Now, the OLA, I remember Frank Huntley said to me one day, he says, be nice, he said, when Ajax gets back into the OLA, or OMLA, I should say. And I says, well, we never really left. It's just that we needed a place for our kids to play. And the parents were not going to Huntsville during the week to play a game at 7:30. You know, like a 5-year-old child, you don't take them that far during the week. So I said, that's why we formed the league. There was no place for them to play. And John Turney approached me about going on the board for the OMLA. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I thought about it, talked over with my wife, Barbara, and she's been a very strong supporter. John Turney said, okay, we'll on the board. Well, I was president of Ajax Lacrosse at that time because I'd gone from coaching because I didn't like what they were doing and moved into the executive thing after being equipment manager as well at one point, which was a terrible job. So that's how I ended up on the OMLA board. So I get to the OMLA board, and I'm sitting around and I'm listening to what's going on, and I was actually appalled. It was so political. And it was just like a free-for-all with everybody with their own personal agendas, no agenda for the province. And I said, that's not right. And so I was Dan Siles. He was from Windsor, but he was from Mississauga. Approached me about, he says, why don't you run for presidency? And I said, oh, I don't know whether I want to do that. And the vice president of the OMLA at that time was Cy Young, okay? And Cy was supposed to be the next president. Well, Cy, there was something happened at a board meeting, it was very political, and Cy was behind it. And it was going to end up designed to make one team a provincial champion. So I said, that's not right. So I'm going to do something about it. That's always been my attitude. I don't like it, do something about it. And so I did. So I ran for presidency, became president of the OMLA, and with all the visions of what we could do, and I was faced with the same thing at my board meetings of what was going on. So at that point, I got support from executive members and to decide to revamp the OMLA and go from the Super League concept, which everybody was paying attention to the zone concept. And the zone concept was based on the principle that to reduce the travel, but also communities within an area would work together to build lacrosse, okay, leave the competition on the floor, but work together, pool your resources, pool your ideas, and hold your clinics together, and that was the zone concept. So that was a big step. And the following convention, I presented to the membership, and they agreed and voted in. There were some people opposed to it, you know, because they felt it was going to take away from some of the elite teams. But you need a strong base in order to grow. So we did that. Then we went through a phase. Ontario government was after '78, the success of the field team, and there was some interest of lacrosse. But the provincial government was very concerned about whether lacrosse, they would continue to support lacrosse going forward. And they didn't know whether the lacrosse met their criteria, political criteria, for carrying on. So we went through a planning session in terms of combining the OMLA and the OLA. So we went through a planning session up in Aurelia, and when that was over, we just put together a plan to amalgamate the two organizations. The first year we presented to the board, our board approved it, went to the AGM, and Bill Walker was president of the OLA. They were presenting, supposed to present on the affirmative on the other side. And halfway through my presentation, I got told, you have to go into the other room. They're going to turn it down. So I went in there and I spoke, and they still turned it down. I went back in, and I convinced the membership that we would still proceed, okay? Because we were all the same family, some just older, you know, all one family. That was the idea. So I sold to them, so we had agreed to it. The following year, the membership from the OLA agreed to it, and I became the new president of the OLA. And then we started restructuring the OLA to be more inclusive of other aspects of the sport, like the field, women's field, men's field, you know, where before it was strictly a box organization. Actually, it was a league. It was a league organization. So we made that change, and that took a little bit of time and some work. Joan Gosling was a real hero for me at that time in helping rewrite the Constitution and amalgamating the parts together. After my meeting up in Ottawa with the CLA board at their semi-annual meeting, when I had to do a report on where we were at, the government had hired a consultant to, in actual fact, to look after the CLA, okay? And he approached me at that time, and he said, the Sport Canada want to pull the plug on the CLA. In other words, they no longer would support them. And I says, well, they can't do that. It's Canada's national sport. And he says, yes. He says, but he says that's what they're going to do. There's some things have gone on. They are in deep debt. There's money they have to pay back to the government. And the only way that we will not pull the plug is if you agree to form a transition team to restart, okay? So I looked at him and I thought, okay, so what we're looking at here is basically that the CLA was bankrupt financially and morally, okay? And I said, okay, we'll do it. So I formed a transition team, and we worked at revamping the constitution of the CLA, again to make it more inclusive, okay? Because my idea is accommodation. You include, you don't make it, it's not just for certain people, it's for people that want to play the game, period. So we had a place for field, and had a place for box, had interlacrosse, had women's field. So we brought all that in, and that's where it came into playing as being part of the structure. But this team, we worked together. We had we had several meetings, of course, all funded by the government, and we put together the plan, the transition plan, and presented it to the CLA members, okay, at the annual general meeting out in Calgary, and they agreed to it, and I was elected as chairman of the board. Peter Avender was still there as president, but I had been told by Sport Canada that he had to go, okay? I mean, you talk about political interference. That was it. He had to go. There were some things that had happened that they weren't very comfortable with. Well, I said, well, I can't do anything, you know, if duly elected. I very much believe in the democratic process, but Peter found out he was not going to have the power that he thought he was going to have, so he resigned, okay? I accepted his resignation immediately, and we resolved the problem, okay? That was a cold cut, yeah, you know, and we moved on from there. So for 13 years, I sat on as chair of the board, and
CLA board.
The CLA board, yeah, 13 years chair of the CLA board. And one of the other things we did was we created a seat on the board for First Nations representative, okay? The idea again was to be inclusive, and the wording of the representation was one part of it, that it was fine to bring in a representative, but we also had to accommodate, okay? Because there was a group of people, Akwesasne, that they exist as a territory, partly in Ontario, partly in New York, partly in Quebec, and they wanted to participate, okay? So we just, easy enough, I did the wording out because they transcended the borders and they were an entity, okay? They could become a player in the CLA. Okay, so their teams would have a place to play, and they had the same structure as the provinces did. Now, and what they did with that structure was up to them. Okay, because there's always self-determination should always be a goal of any structure. Yes, yes, we did. We ordered the President's Cups to Akwesasne. That was, I guess that was just a year or 2 years after that. And there was some concerns raised about, well, how do we know that things will be at the same level as other provinces have held and all that type of thing. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I will go down there, okay? And I'm not running the event, but I will go down there and I'll make sure that everything is okay. And I did, and it was a great event. I had mentioned that one of the things that objectives, long-term objective would be for the CLA to be financially independent, and instead of being dependent just on government money. Because when you're, Ian Scott, Attorney General for Ontario, told me that any organization that receives money from the government, okay, will do what the government says, okay? And I said to him, I says, well, I thought government worked for the people, but you're telling me that people work for the government. He kicked me out of his office. but that was, so anyways, so I went, so that was one of my objectives, was to get off how we would do that, okay? And another one, of course, we had Toronto was putting a bid in for the Olympics, and we were going to be in there as a sport, and I says I wanted to work on that group when it happened. That was, you know, my long-term goals, and the foundation was there as well. So we started the process of forming the Lacrosse Foundation, okay? And the idea of the foundation was that was a body that would sole purpose was supply funding to the lacrosse community through the CLA, okay? And that's what, it wasn't an autonomous body, but it was part of the structure, but they were the caretakers for the future. And at that time I put out a little brochure with the Hall of Fame the Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame, that they were keepers of the past. We were the CLA were today, but the foundation was tomorrow.
Bill Hutton was president of the Canadian Lacrosse Association for 13 years. He oversaw many important moments during a time of recovery for the sport. One of the most historical moments that happened under Hutton's watch was the establishment through an Act of Parliament, Bill C-212, to recognize lacrosse as Canada's national summer sport in 1994. MP Dawn Black, wife of Legends interviewee Peter Black, put forth the motion that led to this seminal event.
I think what needs to be done is people can't forget that they need grassroots in order to grow. Okay, they have to have that. You have to start a strong base. But at the same token, you also need the level up here to shoot for, because that's what people want. People are competitive. Lacrosse players are highly skilled athletes, okay? But they need a goal. They want to go to the next championship. The good players. Okay, so from this base, you develop these good players, and a lot of them give back to the game. But that's what they need to do. You know, if you want to look at some successful sports, basketball is a good example. They're giving back to the game all the time.